Hi everyone, welcome to another training video from Split. Today we're going to talk about how to decide the right targeting method for your experiment. Deciding the right targeting method is very important before you start your experiment, since a lot of these rules will impact how you analyze results. Split offers many targeting methods. So we have whitelisting IDs and segments, we have traffic allocation bar, and we have targeting rules, and we have default rule. Before deciding, we need to answer a few questions. So first question is, how are we using our distribution? Is it a percentage base, or there is a specific criteria, or even sometimes both? It's also important to know if the criteria is predetermined before we start our experiment, or it can change during the experiment. And finally, how big is the population participating in the experiment? So we need to state how big is the population based on the criteria. Is it all the traffic, global? Is it a large subset picked randomly, or a small subset picked randomly? Is it a large or small subset of population of users picked on specific user property? So we start first with the whitelisting IDs and segments. So this is best suited for a small population of fixed user sets, like Scrum team employees, QA, development, and pilot partners. It's important to know how Split calculate the treatment. So usually we go from top to bottom, meaning Split checks the whitelisting conditions first, and then traffic allocation bar, and then targeting rules, and finally the default rule. If the user ID matches any of these, then the treatment is decided. The traffic allocation bar usually represents all the spectrum of the traffic type ID projected from 1 to 100%. This is useful if you want to limit the amount of participants in the experiment. We can also use it in conjunction with targeting or default rule, especially if we want to have a fraction of a percentage. For example, if we want to use a 0.5% only population, then we can set the traffic allocation to 1, and then in the rule we can specify 50%. 50% of 1% is simply 0.5%. The targeting rules are very powerful tools to control the population. It's very useful for large dynamic subsets, like demographic and geolocated. For example, if I want to target all the population in a specific country, say US, I don't need to store all their IDs in segment. That can be hundreds of thousands. I can simply use an attribute of a user, and that attribute is set to a country. This way, I can easily define that condition in a targeting rule. It also allows very complex hierarchy of rules because it supports OR operator and operator. You can also specify one treatment or a percentage of them. Finally, the fallback is the default rule. If the user ID did not match any of the previous sections like whitelisting, traffic allocation, or targeting rules, it will fall back to the default rule. You can choose a treatment or a percentage. So we'll show here how to use targeting for an A/B test case study. First, we use two treatments, one for A, one for B. We also can use the traffic allocation bar so that we start with a small percentage of population and then increase it as the experiment goes on. We only need to use the default rule here, and we can split the population into 50 and 50. Now, we added an unallocated treatment. So the reason that we use unallocated treatment is so that we will be able to analyze the results of one treatment compared to another. Now, the only two treatments we care about is our A and B treatments or A and B populations. Since we had a traffic allocation percentage started at a low number, like a 10%, and then we progressed increasing that percentage, the users who fell outside the experiment went to the unallocated treatment. This way, we will always maintain the same population percentage balance between A and B treatment. It's important to think about how we're going to analyze results when we create our treatment and design our rules. Here's another case study for an e-commerce airline ticket. We want to target specific users with a special expensive flight option. In this case, we think the right population to target should be the first-class users. Since first-class users are minority subset, and we estimate them to be 1,500 IDs, we simply added all these IDs in a segment. Then we created a whitelisting rule to whitelist all those IDs in a segment. No other condition is needed in the traffic allocation or in targeting rules. We simply set the default rule to unallocated. In this case study, we want to target 10% of a region population. And then that 10%, we want to run a 50-50% experiment. Now, since we're using only a specific region, and in this case it's Sweden, we have to use the targeting rule, since the targeting rule allows to add an attribute. And here the attribute is country. Now, once we set the country to Sweden, we need to set the correct percentage we want to test. In this case, we need to use 5% between the two treatments. Together, the 5% treatments will amount to 10% of users' participation. Now, the unallocated treatment is needed so that we can put all the other users from that country into the unallocated, so they don't participate in the experiment. Note here that we did not use the traffic allocation bar, simply because the traffic allocation bar comes before the targeting rule. And as we know, split checks all the condition from top to bottom. So the traffic allocation bar here will be applied to the global population and not to a specific region. Here's an interesting experiment. We want to target 2 countries' population and then do a 50-50 experiment for both populations and then compare the on treatment from the 2 countries. Since we need to compare the on treatment for each country, we have to create an on treatment per each country. In this case, on for UK and on for US. Now we will have an off treatment and an unallocated treatment added to the mix. As we can see, we don't need to use any traffic allocation since we cannot filter only specific regions. It only works on the global population. So we use targeting rules and we use country as an attribute. And if the country is equal to UK, then we put 50% on the on UK treatment and 50% on the off. The other 2 treatments will get 0, and the other targeting rule would take care of the other country. In the end, we will have 50% of UK population getting the treatment and 50% of the US population getting the treatment. Now, the off treatment is going to be mixed between the UK population and the US population, the other 50%. And the rest of the world will get unallocated. Now, if we want to include in the analysis the off treatment as well per each country, then we would have need to create an off for UK and an off for US. So that would be an additional treatment here. But since the requirement was only to compare the on treatment, we can get away with just creating one off treatment. Thanks for watching. Please head to docs.split.io for more information on how to use the Split product.